Okay, one of the first tips I want to share with you is the drain valve. Now to me, this thing just kind of flops around all over the place, and I really think this is kind of sloppy engineering on the side of Harvest Right, and I wish they'd do something about it. So what we're going to, and my concern about that is that the upper hose up here has a metal spiral in it. And so behind the plastic is a piece of metal, and as this rubs back and forth, I'm afraid that this surface is going to be chafed to where it's going to start leaking. And so if you do have an error message that comes up on your freeze dryer a lot, you might want to check this area in here just to make sure you don't have a hole. And you'd probably hear the vacuum hissing if you did. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a zip tie and we're going to go into the top hole and bring that back down to a bottom hole, just like a big U-turn. And we're going to grab this right like that. Put it through there, and then we're going to put this all the way up inside to where this brass shoulder is. And then we're going to tighten up this wire tie. Make it as tight as you can, and then we're just going to trim the end. And now this thing won't flop all around, and you can go ahead and turn it off and on to your heart's desire. Now my next tip deals with the drain back here. Now I do not run my drain into the container. I have a gallon container here. I've never seen any more volume come out of my freeze dryer than a gallon. I have it in the back of my freeze dryer, and I have my hose terminated just above the drain. I've seen lots of stories about people opening up their freeze dryer and releasing the vacuum, and their hose is down into the water, and they suck water up into their chamber, and it spoils their food. I've seen people drill holes in the tubes, put vacuum breakers, and all sorts of gadgets to keep that from happening. Well, this is the simplest solution of all. Cut off your hose, let it dribble or let it drain from above into your container, and you'll never have water enter your vacuum chamber, guaranteed. My next hint or tip deals with the hose that goes between the vacuum pump and the freeze dryer. I have mine suspended with a wire so that the high point is right in the center of the hose. The reason I do that is because it's going to make it harder for any particulates to be able to travel up through the hose and then back down into my vacuum pump. Ever since I've done this, I get less food particulates in my oil, and it's a pretty simple solution, just with a little piece of wire or with a coat hanger if you want. I'd like to give you a tip on what I do when I reach the final dry stage on my freeze dryer. Right now I have a load of asparagus inside, and one of the things I've learned about asparagus is it doesn't dry real equally. And so what I like to do is what I call pausing the freeze dryer, and that's where I'm going to open it up and kind of move the food around on the tray, make sure everything is nice and dry. Plus it also gives me an opportunity to see if I need to add more time. Now I have 4 minutes left on the final dry, but it kind of gives me an idea how things are going. When I get down to maybe an hour or 30 minutes, I will do the same thing. So the way I pause the freeze dry mode is first I go over here to the valve down here, and everyone knows what this thing is. So I'll go ahead and open this up, and you can hear the vacuum venting, and I don't have to worry about sucking up any water because my tube does not go into my pitcher. So after I give this a few minutes to die down, as you can see, I'll come over here to the back of my pump and I'll turn my pump off. And almost immediately the vacuum will end. I'll go ahead and open up the latch, open this up, take out my pad, and I'm going to check my asparagus. Now, I used to cut my asparagus, I used to leave my asparagus whole, but I found out that by the time it got freeze dried and I would put it into the bag and seal it, those really nice pieces of asparagus would break up anyway. So I have learned it's easier just to go ahead and cut my asparagus into smaller pieces. So I can feel, see, here's a piece, here's a cold piece right here. I'll go ahead and put my hand around on here and I can feel the cold pieces. There's a cold piece right here, and there's some cold pieces right here. So I'll just kind of come in here, move things around, and I'm going to do that on each tray. Now another thing you can do, which is also helpful, I'm going to do it on this one, but first I have a trivia question. Which one of these trays is the warmest? Is this the warmest? Most people say this is, and I also agree. Talking to the people at Harvest Right, they actually say that these two trays are the warmest trays because they're farther away from the ice. They do agree that this tray down here on the bottom is the coldest tray, because this tray is closest to the ice. And if you actually take a look down at the insulation material they have down here, they actually have 2 layers of material down here, where up here they only have 1 layer. So in addition to stirring, what you can actually do, you can take out this tray, which we think is the coldest tray, and swap it with a warmer tray. And then we can take these 2 trays and just swap them also. We can put our pad back in, go ahead and lock it up, go back to the pump, turn the pump back on, come over here and close the valve. That is what I call pausing the freeze dryer. And I'll do that throughout the dry cycle just to keep an eye on everything. I'm fortunate this time because when you dry the same type of food in all of your trays, it dries equally. If I was drying, say, asparagus and milk, the asparagus would get done way long before the milk would ever finish up. So I've always found it helpful to dry the same types of food to have the same amount of moisture. Just a quick little tip on how I change the oil for my freeze dryer. I do have the compressor that does require oil, and I just finished a batch just minutes ago. So this compressor, excuse me, this vacuum pump is still nice and warm. And that's when you want to do an oil change. You do not want to wait for it to go cold, because the warmer the oil is, the higher viscosity is going to be, and it's going to flow a lot better out of your pump, out of your vacuum pump. In addition, when I change the oil, I have a little block of wood that I will use in the back to raise it up. So as the oil flows out, it's going to flow out at a higher rate and take all those little particulates of food that may be trapped in the reservoir, along with any water that's going to be inside. So we're going to take off, this is a good old standard filter that is supplied by Harvest Right. So we're going to open that up, and we're just going to let that drain for the next couple of minutes. Now while my oil is draining, the next thing I will do is I will defrost my freeze dryer. Now I do not go through the defrost mode on my freeze dryer. Now I'll tell you why. So inside here we have a number of heating pads. There's a heating pad down here, there's one up above here, there's one up above here, here, and here. When you use the defrost mode on the freeze dryer, these pads heat up. It heats up the shelf and also heats up the entire chamber. And that's a little bit counterproductive when I want to do my next cycle. I got things in the freezer waiting to be freeze dried. And what I do not want to heat up the chamber for my next cycle. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove the gasket. And I'm just going to place that right up on top. And I have this little fan that you can see that's nailed on a board. And what I do with this, it slides right up in there, and I'll just turn it on, and this will take the warmer air from my garage and will cycle it inside the chamber. And everyone has seen how the chamber has all this ice, this all around it. The defrost mode on the Harvest Right freeze dryer will take 2 hours. In the summertime, this will take about 20 minutes. In the wintertime, this will take about 40 minutes. And using an electric fan takes a lot less power than the heating elements inside the chamber. So we're going to set my timer for about 40 minutes. It will come back and I'll show you the next step. Okay, it's been about 40 minutes. Now before I pull this ice out, what I do is I have this little tote down at the bottom to catch all the liquid. So this is dripping from the front of the chamber and in the back of the chamber. So we're going to take this out, turn that off. Now one thing you don't want to do, you just don't want to grab this and yank it out. There's a cable in the back, and I have seen from time to time the cable will actually freeze itself into the ice, and so you don't want to damage anything. So just take this and just kind of give this a little bit of a rock. If you can rock it this way, you can just take this whole thing out with all the ice, and it will slide right to the bottom. And I'm just going to put that right up on top. And all this can come right out. Now the nice thing about this, you now have an internal temperature in here that's almost near freezing. We're at 37 degrees or so, 37, 36 degrees. So once this is wiped out, you can put the rack back inside. You can replace the sill. And the cover. And you're ready to start another cycle. And instead of your chamber being 100 degrees because of the heating elements, it's near freezing. And because I start, all my loads that I do are pre-frozen, I save a lot of time by having a cold chamber. Okay, one of the things you can do when you're freeze drying and you're in the final stage or in final dry is what I like to do, depending on how full my trays are going to be, is I like to kind of stir my trays and rearrange the food in the last process during the final dry stage. And basically what I kind of call this is pausing the freeze dryer. And I'm going to show you how you can pause the freeze dryer. Okay, the first thing I do if I want to stop the freeze drying process is I take my valve and I go ahead and open that to release the vacuum. and I'll let that run for maybe 10-15 seconds, and you can kind of hear the vacuum decrease as the majority of the vacuum is voided from the vacuum chamber. The next part is reaching back behind your vacuum pump and turning the pump off. Go ahead and leash the door and just give it a second, and you'll be able to open it up and have access to your trays. Now, for example, on this bottom tray, I have a lot of cheese. Cheese dries very well, but usually I'll go in here and just kind of move things around so that everything has a chance to get nice and warm, so it will help evaporate or sublimate the moisture. This right here is totally hard. This was vanilla yogurt, so I really can't move that anywhere. The one I'm concerned about is this tray. This tray is rather full, and so I'm actually going to take this tray out, take it into the kitchen, and I'm going to rearrange all the vegetables on this tray because it's really overloaded. Okay, so I took this tray, rearranged a lot of the food on it, and I'm going to put that back in. The tray up on top of here are my steaks, and I'm just going to take these and just turn them upside down. And this is just a sample of asparagus, and put those back in. Now, one of the things I can do, I have 3 hours left in the drying cycle. I'm going to come back out here in about 2.5 hours, and I'm going to check this once again. I can pretty much bet that this is a mozzarella cheese. This feels like it's already done. And so what I can actually do is I can take the mozzarella cheese out and then transfer some of the vegetables from this tray down into this tray and kind of spread them out a little bit so they're not all, you know, so they're not so compact up in that tray. And then I can go ahead and give my system about maybe 2 additional hours and finish drying my vegetables that way. And you just do the same thing in reverse to get this started again. I can just reach back here, shut my valve, and then just reach back and turn on the pump, and everything will be just fine. Okay, we're back to the freeze dryer. Time's about up, so I'm going to check my food again. This is a mozzarella cheese, and this feels like it is absolutely dry. That is done. The steaks, I can feel a couple of cold spots right in there, some cold spots in there. When you're checking your food, if you feel cold spots, don't try to package the meat. It'll just spoil everything. It's better to have them over dry than under dry. If you feel any cold spots, it's not done. Okay, the yogurt, that is done. I can take that out. Now, the vegetables are still cold. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to empty the 2 other trays and return them and spread the food from this tray into the other trays. Okay, so it turns out my yogurt wasn't dry yet, so I chopped it up a little bit to help it dry a little bit better, but my cheese was dry, so I'm going to take some of the vegetables from this drawer, from this shelf, put them down below until I overloaded these trays a little bit. valve and turn on the pump again and add a little bit of extra time and come back later on. Phil here again from Phil's Place. Today we're going to do a process improvement called a Kaizen. What we're going to do, we're going to determine if it makes a difference on how food is laid out on your freeze dry tray. So in both trays we have pork loin, and each tray has exactly 712 grams of pork loin. In this tray it's laid flat like you normally would do, but in this tray we have the pork loin that's layered on top of the one underneath it. So we're going to see which one will dry faster. Both have the same weight, and what we're going to do, we're going to put these drawers, these trays, in the number 2 and 3 drawer or shelves in my freeze dryer. And I have a medium freeze dryer that has 4 shelves. And for those who've done freeze drying in the past, you probably know that the top drawer is a little bit warmer and the bottom drawer is a little bit colder. So to make this a fair test, we're going to put these in drawers number 2 and 3, and then we're going to measure the weight about every hour. So let's begin. So this was pretty much a no-brainer. This tray, where the food was laying flat, freeze dried after 19.5 hours. This tray, where everything was stacked up on top of each other, finished up around 29 hours. We started out with 712 grams of meat in both trays. This tray ended up at 180 grams. This tray ended up at 185 grams. So they are totally dry. This is pork loin, and this is ready to bag. The only benefit, although this tray finished earlier, this tray you could probably put double the amount and added only 10 more hours. So it's not really a worthless cause. If I had a choice, I probably would dry my meat this way, and I usually do, just so I can get more meat done quicker. Thanks for watching. I'd like to show you a really easy way that I use to seal the Mylar bags. So we have 2 bags right here ready to be sealed. I got my temperature all the way up. Okay, here's my oxygen absorbers. So I'm just going to open this little envelope. You take 2 absorbers out, put them in the bags. You put this back on setting number 3. And I'm going to seal this back up for later use. Okay, so what I do, I put my sealer right on the edge of the counter. And then I take my bag and I fold it all the way over to get all the air out. And then I just bring up the end just a little bit like that, put on the very edge of the sealer, take it back up to 10. And you can hear the electric elements hum when it becomes hot. And I usually will hold that there just a little bit longer so it can cool down. These bags are a thermal plastic. They get hot enough to melt to bind together, and before I release the upper arm, I want that to cool off so that the seal is complete. So here I sealed the top. I'm then going to come down right above the tear tabs and put in my second seal. So the heating element is now off. I'm just going to hold it there for about 2 seconds to cool down, just like that. And I always give a little bit of an inspection, take a look across the seal to make sure I don't have any creases or anything there that could allow the oxygen in. So we'll do that again. Fold this all the way over. We're going to get all the air out. Let's bring it up just a hair. stick it in. It's sealing. Power's off. I'm going to hold it there just for a couple of seconds. Let it cool down. We'll do it again. Make 2 seals all together. Just like that. And then once you're done, you can actually slip the material back down and have a nice even storage bag. My next tip is to level your freeze dryer. Not the freeze dryer itself, but to level the actual trays. This is important if you're going to be doing liquids such as freeze-dried milk. In this case, I'm using a line level. Leveling it from left to right is relatively simple because you just have to move the tray assembly and you can level that from left to right. Now, however, you also need to level it front to rear. The easiest way that I found to do that is to level the legs down here by using basically door shims. Door shims are the same things that are used to level a door when it's being installed. They're thin on one end and they're thick on the back end. And you can lift up your freeze dryer. It may take 2 people to do it, but then you can level the legs here and the legs over on this other side from front to rear. So if I go back to my level down in here, if I go ahead and put it in this direction, you can see that my level is just a little bit off. So I need to go down to the bottom and actually level this a little bit up so I can get my bubble exactly straight. Okay, so you can see here that I've used the shims under the legs of my freeze dryer to the top of the table to level my freeze dryer from front to back. Now that that is level, I can put the maximum amount of milk or liquids into my trays without having them spill over. The next tip I have is when you're freeze drying, you want to balance your trays. You don't want to have a lot of food in this tray and very little food in that tray. And not only do you want to balance your trays, but as much as possible you want to freeze dry the same types of food. I mean, for example, you wouldn't want to do a tray of milk and a tray of sweet potatoes because the milk is going to take much longer to do than the sweet potatoes. So you want to kind of average out the content of how much moisture your food have and try to keep the same types of food, like maybe sweet potatoes, carrots, and peas, for example. So in this case I have asparagus. Now this tray has 115 grams, 231 grams, 268 grams, and 552 grams. So the average is going to be 1,192 grams. Now I have a little scale I use, got this from Harbor Freight for under 20 bucks. So this tray is 152, so I have to add it a few pieces to get it up to 1192. Okay, that's 1195, so this one's done. Now it's not going to be exactly the same amount, but we're going to get as close as we possibly can. This is 1232, so I have to subtract some from this one. 1195, close enough. This tray has 1054, so I'm going to add some extra to this one. Now this may seem a little bit on the anal side, but to me it works a lot better this way. Okay, that's 1183. 1193, perfect. And then my last tray here is 1182. So that's pretty darn close. So I have 4 trays with the same amount of food in each tray. That way all the trays should finish around the same time, so I won't have one tray that's done and another tray that still has ice crystals in the food. Just with a real quick freeze drying tip. The best way and the most effective way and the cheapest way of freeze drying is to pre-freeze your food before put it into your freeze dryer. And what I do, since I don't have an extra set of trays, which costs about $80–85 for a set of 4, I have a standard cookie sheet here, and you can either use a ruler, or what I did, I just got a 7-inch wide piece of cardboard, and you can go ahead and pre-lay out, so to speak, a row of food. In this case, I'm doing some rump roast right here, and you can go ahead and lay this out and throw this into the freezer and go ahead and freeze this and then transfer it to a regular standard tray. So we're going to put this in the freezer for probably about an hour or so and freeze it, and then we're going to transfer it into a tray and then throw it in the freeze dryer. Okay, so we got the meat out of the freezer. Let's see, go work underneath it. And just pick it up. Place it right inside. Now we have 2 trays ready to go. Here's my next tip. How many people have a problem with their freezer space? Now, I'm not lucky enough to have a spare shelf, and so what I've had to do is put a couple of boxes on my top shelf to put my meats in, and then I have to stack the shelves up on the top, which, as you can see, it's kind of crowded. But I did come with this idea. So what I did, I welded myself up a shelf. Now this is basically made out of 1/2 inch, 1/16 inch flat bar. This is going to be here on these ends by the current supports in the freezer. Once I clean everything up, it's going to kind of sit right on the top of the current shelves, and that will give me 2 shelves to slide my trays into. Now I suppose you can make something like this out of wood. I'm just lucky enough that I have a shop with a welder and some other tools. The total cost of this was under $10. I went ahead and powder coated it. I know not everyone has equipment to do this, but you could probably get someone to weld it up for you. Or you could probably make something like this out of bolts and nuts, or maybe even wood. Okay, so that's what my shelf looks like once it's installed. Let me tell you, it's a pain to get it in there because the door doesn't open all the way. So basically I have a shelf up here at the top for 1, 2, and I can put 3 down here. And basically it just kind of straddles the current shelf. You can see where I just drilled the holes through the sides, and then I cut right through the holes, so it made like a little saddle where I everything back inside. So I'll go ahead and put my boxes back in and we'll see how it fits. Okay, so now you can see how this kind of all works together. I have my guacamole right here getting ready to put into the freezer, and I have my tray of pieces. So I actually have enough room for 1 more tray, but that's just going to be the oddball unless you happen to have a 5-tray dehydrator, but mine is a 4-tray dehydrator. And another tip I have is don't cover your food when you put it in the freezer. Now I have a frost-free freezer, and I'm sure everyone has heard of freezer burn. Freezer burn is nothing more than pseudo freeze drying. So if you leave your food uncovered, as the air rushes across the food, it will actually help take some of the moisture out of the food prior to freeze drying. So I leave all my food uncovered. The longest my food stays in there is probably only maybe 4 to 5 hours until it's, it freezes, and everything I put into my freeze dryer is pre-frozen. So I hope this might give you some ideas on what to do with your freezer.